right, we're back on Radio Row here. talkSPORT's coverage ahead of Super Bowl 59. We've got live and exclusive in-stadium coverage of the big game, play-by-play with myself, Jeff Reinbold, Greg Rosenthal from NFL Daily, and I've just made a little signing. Somebody who's going to be joining us for the second half. I'll tell you about that on the channel in a couple of days' time. But I'm delighted to say that joining us now on Radio Row, and a guy we spoke to a couple of years ago and now has been back in the headlines a little bit this summer. Former Falcons GM Thomas Dimitroff is with us.
Great to be here. Always appreciate you guys. You guys bring me back to all my buddies like over in the UK that I'm fond of. Leaders. We were very involved with leaders over there. And every time I hear your accents, I'm thinking, David Brailsford. I'm a huge fan of. I know you guys don't follow cycling, but that guy's
excuse me, I follow cycling.
Okay. Well, David Brailsford. Why am I blanking? Who was your?
Well, this is what I was going to ask about actually. Now you've mentioned leaders, because we were talking the other day about the way that we do the media at the Super Bowl and the access to it. And one of our guys, who this is his first time coming, despite having followed the sport for like 15 or 20 years. Said how much it reminded him of something England did ahead of a major tournament 2 tournaments ago, where they started to bring the players in and do these open media days and everything else. I'm like, we know where Gareth Southgate learned that from. He learned that from going to Super Bowls with you guys and meeting Bill Belichick and watching how the Patriots did it in Minnesota. And like, people always ask, what can like the Premier League and football learn from sports like the NFL? I'm like, trust me, they are doing it. They are out there learning
That's a great point. And Gareth, by the way, where is he these days?
Well, right now he's not sure if he's taking another job or not. Is the latest. But
I see.
He's been touted. He left the England job in the summer, and then it's. I saw when you've done that for 8 or 9 years, you probably want to rest.
Can't imagine. I thought he came to the U.S. with Jimmy Worrell and those guys. I thought from the leaders group, and I thought he was doing a little, not working here. I thought he was doing a little bit of work here, and they went back, and I was hoping to meet them and see them again, but I haven't seen them in a while. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Anyway, that totally off topic.
Yes.
Delighted to have you along. Look, let's just start off with you, because, as I said, your name was back in the headlines. You spoke with a couple of teams this off-season with the Jets and the Titans. What got you back involved in that process this year and got you thinking, I want another crack at this?
Crazy. First, I love Sumer Sports. I love what we're doing on the data side. I'm learning every day, and it's great for me. It's widened my aperture, right, as a football man. At the core, I'm an old-school football guy. Like, I love the evaluation side, and I realize the importance of data application, which is vital. During all of this, I've realized when I first got out, when we got fired, Dan Quinn and me, back in 20, I thought I'm going to take 1 year off and I'm going to go back in, AGM, consultant. And then I got this opportunity to be here, and I thought, okay, let me get involved here. And then I realized every day of my life, I think about evaluating talent, building a football team, and I can't swear on this show, right?
Borderline.
Well, every day of my life, I think about losing that Super Bowl and how I'd love to win a Super Bowl back at the helm. And my drive is not to go back there and it's not about the money. It's not about the fame and fortune of anything like that. It's about going back and have another opportunity to put all of my ability on the table and try to build a football team that could win a Super Bowl. So the Jets come along and they mention that they're interested in potentially hiring an experienced guy, right? There's a lot of the young guys. We were talking about young coaches before the show, right? There are a lot of young GMs out there, first-timers getting their opportunity, and I'm all for it. Love the guys. I'll help them as much as possible. I do, however, believe the league needs to continue to hire GMs a second time around. There's no other business out there that does that, I feel. Like, why? There's so much you can learn, and you would be so much better. Coaches are doing it. Why is it not happening more, as a general manager? So I interviewed. They ended up going with a first-timer, Darren Muji, who I love. Darren came from Muj. We actually brought into Atlanta as a receiver, free agent receiver. I've known him a long time. He's now the GM of the Jets, first-timer, along with a first-time head coach, right, in Aaron Glenn. So they're going to approach a city that has a lot on their plate right now, and I love the guys, and I think they'll do a good job with it. But of course, my competitive side is I also think there's room for someone out there to be experienced to help. And the last thing I'll say, there was a parallel when I went into Atlanta that first time. I had an opportunity to go into a situation that was really downtrodden because of the Michael Vick deal back in 2008, and Mike Smith and I were able to turn that around respectfully and humbly. I think, and I thought that would be a good situation in New York. Didn't happen, though.
Was there ever that conversation, and I'm interested what you think of with the first-time GM there about what, when you're interviewing, when you're going through that process, are you discussing part of it is what you would do with, say, a situation like the Aaron Rodgers contract?
Oh, no question. You go in there, you do so much work prior to going in there, and you have to have it mapped out. And that, of course, was one of the leading questions. And people were asking me here, some of the Jets people are like, yeah, but was Woody Johnson trying to angle to try to get you to answer it a certain way? He wasn't. He wanted to hear 100%. What do you do with not only Aaron Rodgers, of course, which is the most important thing, what do you do with this roster? Because the Jets roster, I mean, Joe Douglas built there's some good football players on there. It just, the decisions that were made caused them to make a change, of course.
And not just that, but good players there who we don't know how happy they are to be there right now. And if someone like Sauce Gardner, if someone like Garrett Wilson, if they're happy with the hire, if they hear the right things, like there's a really vital moment right now for those guys going in there of retaining that talent. And, you know, I mean, is that the sort of thing that they also talk to you about? How do you keep those guys around?
How do you keep them around? I mean, what you do is you go up and down. You talk about all the positions, of course, talk about the position groupings, and you talk about who, number one, besides Aaron Rodgers, who the free agents are, who the UFAs are, and are you going to re-sign? Are you going to move on? Are you going to let them go to free agency and then re-sign? Like, that's the stuff you sit down with a new coach and a new coaching staff and a new scouting staff, and you hash it all out together. That's how you start. The first 100 days of taking over an organization, man, there's so much going on during that time, and it's the start of how you're going to turn around that organization. You could be a downtrodden organization with very little respect in the league, and within 6 to 8 months, all of a sudden, that turns around. Coaches want to coach there. Management wants to be there. And in the end, players want to be there. I felt we did a good job with that in Atlanta. I think the Jets can do a really good job. They can turn it around, no question.
I'm kind of, to keep kind of harping on that point of whether it is retention, whether it is that kind of building of the culture in the building. But there's been a fascinating kind of shift, I feel like, in the media coverage. This run, because we've got a guy like Kellen Moore coaching this weekend who is almost expected to take the Saints head coaching job after this, because you've got guys like the two in Detroit who many thought would get to this point, and, you know, would teams wait around for them? Will they wait to hire them? There was a conversation about the Cowboys weren't willing to wait around, and there's this kind of move that we've seen of people pushing for there to be some kind of hiring cycle pause that would mean that nobody hires until we're through to the end of the season. I mean, treating someone who's been in that position, how difficult would it be if the league said you can't start the job until February 10th? And how far behind the eight ball could it put people compared to every other team who's had that extra month and a half to get ready for draft season, combine, everything else?
Oh, that's complicated if you're waiting on that. I mean, it makes sense to do that for all these other, for all the coaches that are potentially out there. I think they've done a good enough job trying to piece it all together. It's complicated. Have you read the rules on that?
It's wild, yeah.
I'm trying to read it, trying to be, versed in it. So I was going in, I was like, man, this is like a puzzle. But I think they've done a good enough job, and that's probably, it seems like the best they can do, because there is no doubt in my mind. I mean, it is a bad feeling when you're behind the eight ball and you're trying to play catch-up all the time on putting together a team. There's a lot of work to be done. And I don't know if that answers your question, but it's
no. But it did answer my question. And kind of to expand on what you were saying before about, like, you're going through that list. That's my other question when it came to the culture side of it. So you're being asked, right, this UFA, this UDFA, whatever it is, would you bring them back in? It's like, well, I've watched them on film, and I've spoken to the guys I know in the league who maybe know them, but I've not been around them day in, day out and seen how they affect the culture. And as you know, there's guys who you might bring back whose level of play isn't as high as it once was, but you know they're a great team guy. And vice versa. There are guys you might not keep around because they are a phenomenal player, but they're not good. They're not a plus for your team overall because of what they do. So how do you handle that when you're going through a recruiting process? You're like, well, actually, I don't know the guy. In theory, I'd re-sign him, but he might be just an awful person around the locker room.
What a great question, and the answer on it is all of us who have been in the league a long time, we have people in that building that we already know whether they stay or go, that we trust implicitly, and they leave. Whether they go somewhere else, I mean, you have guys like Jeff Ulbrich who ends up going back to Atlanta. I just use him as an example. Those guys are going to share the right information. They're not the end-all, be-all. They're not no longer on the team. There are people within the building, too, though, that you can also glean information from. And you're right. It's a lot easier when you're dealing with them inside out, right? I just think people rely on their connections. This is why if you're a good person and you do the right things in this league, if you don't screw people in trades and you don't screw people along the way, you don't have to be a kiss ass in any way. I can say that, right?
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
fine.
have to, but you have to have good relationships. It's still a relationship league. So in those situations where you need to tap into and find out, hey, how is this guy? Well, to be honest with you, that guy is a legitimate cancer in this building, whoever that may be. And what a great piece of information that is. Is he that bad? He might not be. He might have pissed that coach off, and that's the category he had with him. He might still be a pain in the butt, and people just want to get rid of him. So that is a really important part, though, for sure.
Let me ask you what you made of what transpired in Jacksonville this offseason, because you're out speaking to the Titans, to the Jets. We have a situation there where they retain the GM, then they sack him, then Liam Cohen comes in, and right now there isn't somebody in that position. Tony Baselli's joining us tomorrow on Radio Row, and right now he's the Executive Vice President of Football Operations, and he's been involved in, it just seems like a very odd situation there. So what have you made of what you've seen of that from the outside and what you've heard about it around the league?
Well, look, this is the one that I was really interested in. I have a great deal of respect for Tony Baselli, and that's great. Those are the kind of guys that need to be in that role in my mind. And by the way, keep an eye on that. I think there's going to be more presidents, EVPs of football operation, with still a president over top of the business side, right? That still exists. But a guy like Tony, because he has such background, the football people in there, the GM and the head coach that he'd be over top of, will respect him because he's just not some, rando who doesn't really get what's going on, right? I say that respectfully to all of the randos out there. That's just one of those. It's just
including the ones sat around these tables right now.
No. I'm just saying, Tony's got. Have you talked with him before?
Oh yeah. Tony, we've got a lovely relationship with Tony because of his work in the UK.
That's right.
And actually, what's interesting to me is that he is a guy who's been very outspoken about that organisation, in his role as a colour commentator, as a radio host, as everything he's done there. And I spoke to him ahead of the Patriots game in London. We sat down for a good half an hour before that game, and he was a despondent man about the state that team were in. It was lovely to see that he cared, but he was not. He was forthright in how he felt like the organisation was being run, and I almost give Shad Khan some credit because he's been so outspoken about it, and he's gone, right, well, okay, Tony, let's get those opinions in and let's work on those ideas you've got, because you could have gone, no, you've disrespected me in the media, you've spoken ill, I don't want to be involved in that.
No, that's a good point. But because there's so much respect for this guy, he's a Hall of Famer. I was saying in another interview, he would be a great guy again to work in that mode because there's so much respect. And he's going to give some really good sound feedback on the, not only O-line, D-line, right, for sure, and football in general. What a great guy to tap into. In my time in Atlanta, I was there with Rich McKay. Very different presidential role, right? Rich was over top of a lot, and he was head of the competition committee. Had a lot of background in football in a different way. He didn't play. He wasn't like Tony in that way, but he had a lot of opportunity to shed some light. Profundity, if you may. That's a cool thing to be able to tap into some of that. But you have to make sure that president is on board with the group. This is my feeling anyhow. When you're talking to Tony, don't tell him that I think his contract should be tied to the GM and the head coach. I do believe that is a way for it to work. Too often times you get a GM and a head coach there, you're thinking about a president over top, they're like, this guy's against us. He's, because he's in the role over top of him, they're going to close him out. Yeah, okay, buddy, thanks a lot for stopping by and giving us some so-called profundity. And they close the door and whatever, we're going to move on here. Which, I think, if you can take that position, again, hypothetical, not Tony Baselli, you can take that position and you can tie that contract to the head coach and the GM somehow, get creative with it, so they all feel that it's a right three-way. Because this league is such a paranoid league, and a couple games in, it starts getting hot, and all of a sudden people are like, is the president for me? Is he not for me? You want them to all be together. That's what I ultimately think.
And that is, it's one of my biggest, as an outsider looking in, as a guy that covers the league, as a guy that, has some relationships, but nowhere near the kind of level of people who are involved. It forever baffles me when you have situations, and I will give a real example. The way that it's happened with the Bears over the last decade, where you go, we've got a GM, we've got a coach, we're firing the coach, this GM's going to now draft a quarterback, we'll bring a new coach in, but then after a year the GM's gone, and we're going to bring it in. And it's just, there's never a joined-up thinking, it feels like. I think they finally now finding a joined-up thinking by the looks of it, and for me it's the biggest thing is, I'm not saying you always have to hire a GM and coach together. Like, we see examples where it works. John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, that kind of like where you get two guys and they are simpatico, and that's great. But you at least need to have two guys that buy into each other and have that relationship, surely, right? And three, you say, with the presidential role.
I exactly agree. And, that's got to work well so that there's no paranoia when you're going and you're ultimately all leading up to the owner in a certain way, right? And that's another thing that people talk about. In that situation, is Tony Boselli, and now we will come back to Tony, is Tony going to report to Shad Khan? And are the new head coach and the new GM, whoever it is, going to report to who? Are they going to report to Tony Boselli or not? And ultimately, Tony has final say over football. Does he? It's just going to be. It has to be mapped out for football people. They don't have a lot of patience with ambiguity, right? They want their. One of my biggest pet peeves in the NFL as a general manager is, don't ever worry about hurting my feelings. I would much rather you tell me exactly my role, of course, and who in this situation, who is responsible for this. And if I'm not responsible for it, I might be a little agitated, but I get it. The whole nebulous sort of who has what line, it's deleterious to the success of football, in my mind, the team.
I'm sorry, how many other guests are going to use the word deleterious for us today? Like, unbelievable.
Well, it was on my mind because sometimes it just describes exactly what it is. Harmful, I don't know. I can't even figure it out.
I was a huge fan of it. It's absolutely fine. Okay. You mentioned your relationship and the work you did with Dan in Atlanta. How much fun did you have watching what him and Adam Peters, another guy you know well, right? Yeah. How much fun did you have watching what they built in Washington this year and the potential there?
I love it. I mean, Dan and I, we'll text all the time, and we have a really good relationship. And those are always unfortunate, right? We put 6 years in together. 5 years were really good. The last year is always dusty because it is, right? There's just a lot going on. I loved seeing what he did. The funny thing is, it's kind of role reversal, right? And Adam, we worked in New England together, so I've known him for a long time. I'm really happy for both of them. But when Dan came into Atlanta, I was the 7-year vet. He was the rookie. He goes up there, AP's the rookie, and he's the 6 or 7-year vet in that role. So I think it works really well for Dan to be in that sort of role with someone that either he's learning from or now he's kind of the mentor in that world. I love it. And I will tell you, every one of he comes to the table. There was, like any time, there are other coaches that were considered during that time when they hired him. And he's the kind of guy that every player that plays for him, most every player, I don't know how many players came to me and told me, T, like, I'd love to stay around. I'll take less money so I can play with Dan Quinn. Like, that is a huge feather in the cap. That doesn't happen. And that's not BS. Those guys are like, look, this is how I want to play. And this is how I want to play the rest of my career. So please don't cut me and keep me with Dan. So it's fun to watch that.
It is fact. We've spoken with Washington players a lot this year with their running the playoffs and everything. And all DQ is the guy they all want to talk about and all love talking about. And I think, like you talked about that second chances thing. I mean, he was the last coach hired last time round. There was this theory that Washington really wanted Ben Johnson. They really wanted this guy. And they ended up with Dan Quinn, and it couldn't have ended up being a better decision for them.
No question about it. Look, I look back on those, and so many people you talk to, it's never, very rarely is it the first choice, right? Someone told me when I got the Atlanta job, I was the 10th choice for them. I'm like, 10th, huh?
10th.
All right, here we go. Then the competitive.
Have you got the other 9 written in a thing above your desk, like Tom Brady and Tom Brady 6 or whatever?
Yeah, I know, right? That's kind of where it goes. But to Dan's point, yeah, maybe he wasn't the first choice. Who knows? But he's a fighter and he's a competitor, and he came in, and I knew that was. We didn't know how far it was going to be. What a wonderful choice in Jaden Daniels. And Jaden Daniels, not only he's athletic and dual threat. That cat was thriving on all levels, short and intermediate, long, savvy, awareness. I mean, he came to the table with so much. Even when he ran, and I'm like, oh, my God, he's going to get killed. There's something malleable about his body, right? And also, I'm like, how did that guy not?
Seriously, how, like, for a guy who is so lightweight, and that was always the concern, right? Is he going to be built enough for the NFL? Right. The guy doesn't get hit. He scrambles out of the pocket all the time. He steps up in the pocket. His awareness is phenomenal. Yeah. Like, he looks like a 10-year veteran when he does that stuff. It blows my mind.
And then he falls, and all of a sudden I see him fall, and then it's another 3 yards falling. I don't know how he does it, but it's been great to watch.
And just because you mentioned at the time of the Patriots, what's been your view from the outside watching how Bill has ended up at UNC and that whole situation.
Well, what's funny, I have a lot of connections with UNC because my wife's family, there's a lot of, the whole UNC alum thing is like they're on the edge of their seat because they're going to, Mac Brown was good. Of course, he had a run there, but he was at the tail end of his world. Bill Belichick's bringing instant credibility, instant accountability. These guys better understand he's not all smiling the way he is. Like, he's going to get after them. What I think is great, we all know that he's not the most talkative guy. Give him 30 seconds on the phone with the uncle of one of the best prospects out there, and he will convince that guy to come there. Not because he's a great salesman. I think all he has to say is, look, I'm going to make your kid the best that he can be, and I think that's going to be a sell. They're going to do, I think, if he stays there, which is another question, how long will he stay? But I think he can put together a really good program.
I think, as much as that's the case, I think there's already a succession plan there, right? You see how well Steve did in Washington, and that's the idea, is that it stays in the family, right? But I think from my perspective, that idea of Bill Belichick sitting on the couch of a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old's family and trying to trying to play nicey with the family and win them over. It is a funny image in my head. I'm sure he'll be brilliant at it, but it is amusing.
But as well, he's got Michael Lombardi there. Michael can talk. He has a really good ability to do that. So I'm sure he'll be tapping into Michael's ability to recruit too.
Love it. Look, Thomas, I could talk to you on subjects like this for hours. It's really good fun every time. And look, we hope that if it is your aim to push back and get that second opportunity, that does come up for you somewhere, because love to see everyone from that team, like Dan Quinn. I mean, I'm a 49ers fan, so I obviously want to see Kyle do well. But I was there that day. It was a tough day, but you feel like everyone on that team deserved something, and I hope that you all go on to have great success.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, you guys are great. Appreciate it. Anytime.